Hello again, everyone. This is Brian Brown doing here for another Block Constructed video, running another daily event. And I am playing red-green uh, aggro, I guess you could say. It's kind of similar to the red-green aggro deck in Standard, where um, it's not like a traditional aggro deck that it plays like mana accelerants like these, and then it backs these mana accelerants up with like good four-end creatures, and then uses like uh, bonfire and other good removal spells to like levy an advantage. So it's kind of more of a mid-range aggro deck. It's not like a traditional, um, just aggro deck where like the curve starts at 1 and ends at 3 or 4. But anyway, this is the deck, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it and why I think it's a reasonable choice to play. This deck for a while was, in my opinion, just the best deck in the format, but that's kind of fallen off lately, and I'm not certain I can pinpoint exactly why. I think it's because other decks have adapted to it basically, and have basically figured out ways to beat the basic game plan of this deck, and I'm going to talk about that. So, first, the mana base. You have 3 Wolf Runs. Wolf Run is a very important card in this deck because you have a very consistent mana base. This is what lets you finish the game off. A lot of times you run into situations where you do some early damage to them, but then they stabilize behind like some big creatures, and you're not able to finish the job. This is what lets you do that. So it just makes anything into a threat, especially Strangleroot Geist. Wolfrun and Strangleroot Geist are like best buddies. You'll see them like everywhere together. So, and Evolving Wilds is kind of ubiquitous in Block Constructed. No reason not to play it, especially when you're just playing Forest and Mountains. Otherwise, you want to get Forest or Mountain, regardless of what you need. So the reason the mana base is so good in this deck is you play a lot of Forest, play more Forest than most green decks do. So you have a very good shot of hitting like your green spells early, which is what you want to do. You have a better shot than the other decks do. Then you have Abundant Growth, Dawnshredder Elk, and Borderland Ranger all to fix mana. So there's just so many ways to fix mana that it's very rare that you run into serious mana issues with this deck. So that's one of the selling points too. It's just a very consistent deck, kind of does the same thing every game. As for the game plan, you want to play early creatures. You have Pilgrim to ramp you a little bit. Elk ramps you. Borderland Ranger doesn't ramp you, but helps you hit your land drops. And then Strangleroot Geist is just like a nice aggressive threat. You want to use the early turns to do this. Maybe like use Pillars and Devil's Play to stimmy your opponent's game plan. And then you want to use Huntmaster and Hellrider to just kind of nail in the coffin them. And Hellrider is just a very aggressive threat that just really outputs a surprising amount of damage. And it seems like it doesn't really fit that well in this deck because you're not playing a lot of early drops to like curve into, but you'd be surprised at the damage that this does, even in a deck like this. So Hellrider is basically the reason to play red-green over Jund or Naya or any of the other 3 color combinations, is that in red-green, you can actually cast Hellrider, and like Hellrider's harder to cast in some of the other decks because they have to play like black spells or white spells, and their mana base isn't as good. So I'm only playing 3 bonfires, which may seem like kind of blasphemy. I know I've said in earlier videos that I would never play less than 4, but one thing about Magic is sometimes you want to you don't want to get stuck in your ways. You want to realize that sometimes you might be wrong about things. So I know with Bonfire that, I'm not, maybe sometimes, you don't actually want to play 4 Bonfire in every single red deck. So I think this is an example of a deck where you don't really want it. It's good in this deck still, but you don't really have the same style of game plan that the Naya deck did. The Naya deck was a little bit more of a controlling deck because you had like Restoration Angels and stuff, and Bonfire just was a lot stronger in that deck than it is here. So, I've cut down to 3, and I have a 4th on the board, and so, I'm going to bring in 4 against decks where I want 4, but sometimes I get flooded with too many of these bonfires, so I decided to cut to 3, which I still think may be wrong, because I know how powerful the card is, but so be it. 3 pillars for Devil's Play. I'm not playing any Brimstone Volleys, and the reason is that I have to cut some of these burn spells to make room for some of these more early creatures. And while I think in like a Naya deck, you want the burn spells more, in this deck you want these guys more because they interact better with Hellrider. So that's kind of the reasoning behind cutting down on some of the burn and playing more cheap creatures. For Devil's Play, though, is kind of, I want to just play this in all my decks now. It just ends the game, so good at ending the game. And just being like basically 2 removal spells in 1 is also good for grinding your opponent out of the game. So this is the deck, and I guess we'll talk about the sideboard a little bit before we get into the rounds. Grafdigger's Cage. The Angel of Glory's Rise deck has been on the rise a bit, so playing 3. These sideboard cards are the same sideboard cards that I've basically talked about in every video, so I apologize if you've heard me like discuss why I'm playing these cards before, but when you're playing red and green, like these are generally the cards that you want. Like Zealous Conscripts is for Falconwrath Aristocrat, as I've stated that before. It's also for good against control decks. Garruk Relentless, good against control decks, good against the zombie deck. I'll bring it in some other matchups too sometimes, depending on how my opponent is playing. Like some opponents have certain styles. Like some people are a little bit more aggressive than others in how they like to play the game out. If my opponent likes to play a little bit more defensively, I want Garruk. Tree for the aggressive white-red deck. Blasphemous Act is, again, this is my sideboard strategy against Silverheart decks. I want to bring in Blasphemous Act, and I want to like catch them with their pants down, you could say. I want them to go all in on Silverhearts and then just get blown out. Pillar, just another removal spell for decks that play like this. Sometimes I want it against decks that play this, depending on the deck. Definitely want it against zombies. Get out of here. Gravecrawler, get out of here. Drolf's Messenger, etc. And then Bonfire for the decks where Bonfire shines most. So this is the deck, and hopefully I can show you how good it is.